Hey, we're glad you are with us for this second week of the series that we're calling Undivided, where we're talking about the things that we want to do to stay together when everything seems to want to pull us apart. And today we're talking about the one thing that we can all agree on. Whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, everybody can agree on this one thing. Stick around and find out what it is. Look, click the link below, get the message notes, invite a friend along, and let's jump in together. Well, listen, last week we started a new series called Undivided, because what we believe around here is that Jesus' desire for us, in fact, his prayer for us, the thing that he prays for us, is that we would experience the kind of unity that just defies explanation, the kind of unity together that defies other people's expectations of any group these days, and that at the end points everybody in the direction of Jesus by the way they see us living out our faith together. And what we just know is that in a year like we're heading into, this coming year, you've already seen it all over the place, it is going to provide us opportunities to be pulled apart in every direction. Like anytime there's periods of time where strong opinions are flying in every direction, it just provides us opportunity to join in with that and to get pulled apart and sucked into the fighting and the arguing that everybody else is doing. In fact, if you've been watching the news this week, you know everybody just got handed a big opportunity to choose up sides and start lobbing bombs at each other about what was right and what was wrong. Haven't we, right? So as we're talking about this issue of unity, how do we stick together in this? Why don't we start with something that we can all agree with? So whether you're a Christian or not, whether you believe in God or not, I haven't found anybody who doesn't believe this right here. That followers of Jesus should be different. Everybody kind of expects that when somebody shows up saying they follow the teachings, the life, the ways of Jesus, that they would become more and more like Jesus. Everybody believes it. People who don't believe in Jesus think that this ought to be true. Not that they're perfect or not that they're better than, but because these people are following someone who's called them to a different way of life, generally people expect those who follow Jesus to be living a different kind of life, to be showing up in a different kind of way. In fact, you would also expect a group of people like that who follow the same leader to generally be heading in the same direction. Not that they're identical, not that they're copies of one another, not that they're uniform, but that they're unified around some common tenets that reflect the teachings, the ways, the life, the posture, the demeanor of the one they follow. I mean, if you tuned 100 pianos to the same tuning fork, they would generally be in tune with one another, right? And when those followers disagreed about something, what you would generally expect is that they would go back to the teachings of the one they follow to get clarity and understanding about how they should approach whatever it is they disagreed about. You would expect that one of the things that marks a group like that, one of the things that makes them distinctive, one of the things that makes them conspicuous would be their unity. You'd expect them to listen to their leader, to be looking to Jesus, looking to God, and then rally around whatever God says about whatever is going on. You'd expect them to listen to God and stay together. So, let me just ask us, how have we done at that? I mean, not just when things are good, not just when things are easy to do that, but when there are issues flying all around, when there are divisive issues that just bait us into arguments in every direction. Let's say, I don't know, like in an election season, how have we done as followers of Jesus? How'd we do last time around as followers of Jesus? I mean, I don't mean to keep beating a dead horse here, but if we were to give Christians a score for how we rallied around the teachings, the life, the ways of Jesus in political conversations and every other conversation over the last several years, how have we done in fighting for unity? How have you done? How have I done? Well, in this series, we're trying to point at this, that Jesus' longing for us, his desire for us, the thing that he prayed to his heavenly Father about on our behalf is that we would be one. And we find a part of that prayer in John 17 where Jesus said this, and boy, you gotta get this. Jesus is praying for us, and he says, may they experience such perfect unity. May they experience such a distinctive, such a conspicuous kind of unity that the world would know that you, God, sent me and that you love them as much as you love me. In other words, God helped them to be so unignorable in their unity, in the way that they stick together, that the whole world would have to sit up and take notice that the one that they follow must be not of this world for people to act like that. And that the world would know more and more that if a God loves a people like that, he must also love someone like me. That was Jesus' prayer for us. Really matters how followers of Jesus show up, doesn't it? So in these next weeks, we're gonna talk about some things that can be deadly to our unity. I mean, not just in political conversations, right? But they can be deadly to unity in any relationship, in your friendships, in your marriages. These could be deadly to unity in any of those relationships. And so we're gonna start right here with blame. Can I just tell you, if you want to tear any relationship apart or tear any group apart, just start doing that. It works every time. Just find something wrong and then fire away, right? Pretty soon you will not need to worry about having a relationship with that person or that group anymore if you just keep doing that right there. And listen, whenever anything goes wrong, whenever anything is wrong, whenever we see something that's not quite the way it ought to be, in fact, whenever we do something wrong, our natural tendency is to find someone or something to blame. Listen, blame is not the original sin, but it is a really close second, all right? Remember in the creation story? The story of Adam and Eve in the garden, and God said, look, lots of trees, lots of fruit, don't eat that one, all right? And what did they do? They promptly ate that one. And we find them in Genesis 3 in the aftermath of this terrible decision. And it says this, when the cool evening breezes were blowing, just another day in the Garden of Eden, the man and his wife heard the Lord God walking about in the garden. Ever had that happen to you? You know you did something wrong, and then here comes God going, hey, how's it going? And that's what he did. So they hid themselves from the Lord God among the trees. That should have been a tip-off right there, right? And so the Lord God calls to Adam. He says, hey, where are you? Now, God did not lose Adam. He knew where he was. He, of course, wanted Adam to understand where he was. And so Adam replies, well, you know, I heard you walking in the garden, so I hid because I was afraid, because I was naked. And that's the new realization for him. He never realized this before because God says, who told you you were naked? Like, how'd you know that? You used to be innocent, and now who told you this? And God, you could hear God talking to Adam like our parents talked to us when we were like in junior high, right? This is this conversation. Have you eaten from the tree whose fruit I commanded you not to eat? Now, of course, Adam knows he had been had. So you know what he does? He says, Lord, look, yes, I admit, it was me. It was totally my fault. I did it. I take full responsibility for my actions. I should have known better. And I am standing here ready to receive whatever consequences I deserve because I was wrong. Not really. This is what he did instead. It was the woman. It was her fault. And by the way, who you gave me. That woman, you gave me the fruit and I ate it, right? It wasn't me, it was her. She's the real problem here. And oh, by the way, you gave her to me, so really, if you're scoring at home, it's her fault and it's your fault. And what should be abundantly clear to all of us in this conversation is it's anybody's fault but my fault. Sure, I put the fruit in my mouth. I mean, let's talk about, who's really responsible for this terrible situation we're in, which would again be her and you, by the way, and clearly not me. Thank you very much. Ladies, if you think you're off the hook, the Lord turns to the woman and says, hey, what have you done? And of course, what does she say? It was that serpent. Dude was a snake, man. He lied to me, so clearly this could not have been my fault. Whenever something goes wrong, whenever we've done something wrong, whenever something is wrong, it is in our broken and fallen, our imperfect nature to go looking for someone or something to blame. It has been that way from the beginning. And you're probably sitting there going, so you're saying it's not really my fault then, it's theirs. See? Look, this is how blame works. Blame goes looking around. I mean, isn't that how it works? Blame goes looking for some place to put the responsibility so that I look better and you look wrong. In its essence, it's an attempt on our part to avoid accountability and to make ourselves look better than we actually are, trying to separate us from anything that might be considered wrong or bad or less than. Now, don't get me wrong, and I want you to hear me. There is a time to sort out legitimate responsibilities for actions that are wrong and to administer real justice for those wrong actions, to hold people rightly accountable for wrong actions. There is a time to do that. But can I just say, it is never done well alone. It is never done well in echo chambers. It's always done better together to understand what real responsibility is and where that responsibility should be placed. But see, blame isn't about sorting out legitimate responsibility, is it? It's about moving real responsibility away from me while at the same time finding a way to condemn you or someone or anyone but me. And I want to tell you, it is so damaging to every kind of relationship. It immediately sets us at odds with other people. I mean, think about when somebody comes at you with blame. It immediately sets us at odds with other people. It immediately diminishes our own personal ability to grow and to make progress. It poisons every kind of relationship we have. It poisons our relationship with God, as we have seen. It poisons our relationship with other people. It poisons our relationship with reality. And it poisons our relationship with ourselves. Even though blame looks around, it never gets us anywhere. It only makes things worse. Andy Stanley, who's this great pastor in Atlanta, said this one time. He says, you can't blame your way into a better future. He said, you can blame your way into the future, you just can't blame your way into a better future. Yeah? I was reading this book years and years ago by a guy named Scott Peck. And Scott Peck was kind of a philosopher, psychologist. I mean, he's a very thoughtful, educated guy. He wrote a book called The Road Less Traveled. He eventually became a follower of Jesus before the end of his life. And he wrote this in this book, The Road Less Traveled. He said, we must accept responsibility for a problem before we can solve it. We cannot solve a problem by saying, it's not my problem. He says, we can't solve a problem by hoping that someone else will solve it for us. I can solve a problem only when I say, this is my problem, and it's up to me to solve it. Listen, everybody who's been in recovery, our Celebrate Recovery community knows this right here, that there is no progress until we can own up to our responsibility in a problem, to rightly place responsibility and stop blaming our actions on other people. So, what is the antidote here? I mean, let's get on the other side of this. What do we do instead? Well, according to Jesus, if we want to keep blame from poisoning all of our relationships when things go wrong, we got to do this. We got to look in some different places. We got to go looking in at least two different places. And the first one we run into is in the we find in the Gospel of John, chapter 9. We've been reading through the Gospel of John. You may have come across this story as you've been reading through the Gospel of John. Jesus is walking along with his disciples, and they run into a guy who's been blind from birth. And there's this great story that ensues about how this guy who is blind comes to realize who it is that has helped him with his blindness and who has saved him from this life of living the way that he was living. And he went on to start sharing with other people with the little bit that he knew about Jesus, sharing with all kinds of people about how they could come and follow Jesus. So it's a great story. You need to read it in John chapter 9. But as Jesus and the disciples are walking along, they run into this guy blind from birth, and the disciples ask Jesus this question. Get this. They say, "Rabbi, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins?" Now, do you feel the blame in that a little bit? I mean, their immediate assumption is there's somebody to blame. Now, in fairness, it was in the fabric of their culture. I mean, they were raised to think that any kind of physical malady, particularly birth defects, those kind of things that would leave somebody with twisted or crippled legs or a crippled hand or with blindness or things like that, those kind of physical maladies were a result of somebody displeasing God. And in fact, in the Roman culture, it was the gods. You know, you did something wrong and the gods were unhappy, they would rain down fire on you. Anything that was going wrong, anything that was a physical malady in particular, was a result of somebody doing something wrong. And so they came by this naturally. But you can hear the blame in it, can't you? Who sinned? I mean, whose fault is it? Whose terrible choices caused this to happen? Whose faulty character made this? They were looking around for someone to blame, somewhere to place the responsibility, someplace to land the accountability. But check out Jesus' reply here. Jesus says, look, it was not because of his sins or his parents' sins. And you need to get this line. This happened so the power of God could be seen in him. See what Jesus is saying? Maybe there is another way to look at this. Maybe there's another way to understand this, not just to assign blame or to heap shame on somebody or go looking for a place to put the responsibility. Maybe the way we need to look at it is here is an opportunity for the power of God to be put on full display. Maybe instead of looking around to see who's to blame, we look to God to see what God is up to in the midst of the terrible situations we see around us. Because can I tell you something? God is always at work. I don't think you heard me. God is always at work. I mean, we have a God who's made it his business, right? To look into things in this world, our lives included, things that are not like they should be, things that are messed up and seemingly beyond repair. And for God to stick his hands into the clay of those situations and begin to redeem and craft a better outcome so that the power of God is on display in our lives and in the situations we're into. I mean, last time I checked, we still have a God that works all things together for good, right? So as we look at those situations in the world and we go, man, that should not be, or man, some people made a really bad decision here. Instead of looking to blame, what Jesus is inviting us into is this, to look at those circumstances in a way that we can say, you know what, that probably shouldn't happen, but God is at work in there to bring his redemption to that and to put his power on full display. That's what Jesus is talking about. Listen, Jesus doesn't stop there. He goes on in the story and he says this kind of really weird thing, but listen how it ties in, right? Jesus said, look, we got to quickly carry out the tasks assigned to us by the one who sent us. In other words, we've got to be about the work that God has given us to do. And Jesus says, I'll tell you what I'm doing. While I'm here in the world, I'm going to be the light of the world. And what he's saying to us is, hey, while you're in the world, guess what you get to do? Be the light of the world. Be the light that looks into those things that everybody wants to look away from, that everybody wants to cast blame on somebody in and say, you know what? This might be an opportunity to put the power of God on full display as I show up as the light of the world in this situation. That's what God's asking. We look at the world and go, man, this looks like the worst possible moment. And God says, this could be my finest hour. We've just got to see it differently. We've got to look for the power of God. When we see things going wrong, we're pretty sure who to blame. Could we instead look to God? Because maybe this could be the moment we see God do what only God can do. This blind guy lived in darkness, but it was in that darkness that Jesus showed that he was the light of the world. Jesus found a guy whose legs were twisted up and crooked and crippled, and Jesus showed that he's the one who can straighten things out. Jesus showed by his own death on the cross that even in death, he is the resurrection and the life. Listen, we've got a God who specializes in showing up in the worst possible moments and making things happen that we never could have imagined. How about if we do that instead of just blaming the players? That we look to the one who's actually the author of life and the author of good and has every good thing in mind for us. When something goes wrong, when something is wrong, maybe instead of looking around to see who's to blame, we just look to God and stick together. But there's one more place that Jesus says that we ought to look. And I'm just gonna warn you, it's challenging and you're not gonna like it. We need to look inside. We need to look inside. Matthew chapter 7, Jesus, finishing up his Sermon on the Mount, says this. He says, don't judge others, and you will not be judged. You know, we love to quote that verse. Like when someone's coming hard at us, you know, we want to go, hey, don't judge, right? Because you're gonna be judged. In fact, Jesus says, you will be treated as you treat others. The standard you use in judging is the standard by which you will be judged. I mean, when people are coming at us with all kinds of blame for all kinds of things, we love to quote this verse, hey, don't judge me, right? Because you're gonna be judged in the same way. Can I tell you, there is no indication in the original language that Jesus was talking about God's judgment here. What he was saying was blame begets blame. You start blaming other people, and guess what they're gonna do? They're gonna start looking for reasons to come back at you with the same. You judge somebody else, they're gonna start looking for reasons to come back and judge you. Blame creates this downward spiral of negative upon negative upon negative, upon blame, upon judgment, upon judgment. Have you ever done that? I mean, somebody comes hard at you about something and you kind of silently commit that next time around you're gonna give it right back to them. Am I the only one? So into that, Jesus asks us a couple of questions. And I could just see Jesus kind of sitting back and folding his hands and just lobbing these questions out for his followers to deal with. He says, so, why would you worry about a speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? So let's think about that for a minute. Why would you do that? Why would you worry more about a little speck in somebody else's eye, a little piece of chaff? You know what he was talking about? He was talking about when the guys would take wheat out and throw it up in the air and the wind would come and blow all the chaff away from the kernels of wheat. And you know, they'd be throwing it up and then something, you know, wind would blow a little piece of, you know, something in your eye and guys would be going, oh man, that's what he was talking about. Why would you worry about a little speck in somebody else's eye when you have a gigantic beam sticking out of your own? Why would you do that? Could it be, I'm just spitballing here, but could it be that maybe you think you don't have a log in your eye? Because if you had a log in your eye, surely someone as bright as you would notice that. Someone as intelligent as me would notice that. Or maybe the reason we do that is because I think that the beam that's in my eye, the log that's hanging out of my face, isn't really that big a deal, certainly not as big a deal as that tiny little speck that shows up in your eye. Maybe that's why we do that. I know which one is mine. Do you know why you do that? I don't think that was a rhetorical question that Jesus was asking. I think he really wants us to think of an answer. Well, the next question he throws out then is this. So, Now that you got that figured out, how can you think of saying to your friend, let me help you get rid of that little speck that's in your eye, when you can't see past the log that's in your own eye? Do you hear what he's asking? He's saying, how can I help you if I can't even see me? How can I see, if I can't even see a beam in my eye, what makes me think I can see clearly enough to help you with a little piece of chaff in yours? If I can't seem to deal with my issues, what makes me think I am skilled enough to solve yours? Isn't this the issue that comes between us when we are trying to fight for unity? I mean, if all I see is the speck in your eye, if all I see are your faults, if all I see is what's wrong with your thinking, if all I see is what's wrong with your decisions, if all I do is blame the problem on that little thing that's in your eye, while all the time you are sitting across the table staring at me and the gigantic beam that is in my eye, what do you think that does for our ability to stand together as partners and solve real problems? Well, here's Jesus' answer about how to get the blame out of our game. First, he calls us hypocrites. We'll get to that in a second. He says, first, why don't you get rid of the log in your own eye? And when you do that, then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. Can you see what he's saying? He's saying you'll never see well enough to solve any problem as long as there is something that is causing you to not see the world correctly, for you to not see things right, as long as there's a log obscuring your vision. And Jesus says, if you blame a problem on somebody else's issue without first dealing with your own, he says you're actually a hypocrite. The word literally means like a pretender, like an actor. You're acting like your stuff doesn't stink when everybody can smell you, right? That's what he's saying. And if you think Jesus is being harsh by calling us hypocrites and telling us to deal with ourselves first and all this, listen, this is exactly what we're thinking when somebody comes to blame us, isn't it? I mean, somebody comes hard at us and we're like, hey, why don't you deal with yourself first? Who are you to tell me about the, you go clean up your side of the street first and then come. Isn't that what Jesus is saying that we ought to do? Clean up our side of the street first. Get the beam out of fix the thing that is skewing our perspective. Fix the thing that's causing us to not be able to see things clearly. Can I just make an observation here? This is mainly an observation about me. Maybe you too. I am way more generous in my assumptions about why I have a log in my eye than I am about why you have the little speck in yours. Way more generous in the assumptions about why I can't see things correctly than I am about why you can't. I have way more grace for me than I have for other people. Anybody else with me? Jesus is saying, look, when you see problems, when you see people being problems, when you feel like something is gone wrong in the world, when you see stuff on the other side of the street, you ought to look in the mirror first and let Jesus help you. Let Jesus begin to fix you. In fact, one of the best ways you can do that is just invite some other people around to go, hey, could you take a look here and help me? Do I have a log hanging out of my eye? Is there something in me that I'm not seeing correctly? Imagine the conversation around any issue in our culture, around any issue in your marriage, around any issue in your relationships with your family, with your kids, with your friends down the street. Imagine sitting across the table from them to work those out and first starting with, I might not be seeing this correctly because I know there's things in me that are obscuring my vision. Could you help me with that? Help me to see better. Imagine how the conversation would be different. Imagine how that turns the temperature of the conversation down. Instead of me having to jump up on the table and scream and yell to try to get my opinion of how this thing ought to be fixed across, and instead inviting someone to help me see better before I ever try to help them see better. Because Jesus says when we do that, then we will be able to see well enough. And you know what he meant by that phrase, see well enough? He meant to be able to see and understand, to discern, to understand the issue all the way through so that you could help then somebody else. We can only help other people to see more clearly when we're willing to let other people help us, when we're willing to let Jesus help us see more clearly too. If you haven't done work on you, don't try doing it on others. Because even if you have, and many of us have, I mean, that's why we come here, right, is to let God do some work on us. But remember, there's always more work to do on us. Listen, I get it. When we blame somebody for something, what we hope is for correction. We're hoping to open their eyes. We're hoping that they say, hey, thanks for pointing out my fault. I can see things so much more clearly now. Can I just tell you, that never happens on the other end of blame. If it worked, it would have worked on you when somebody blamed you for something. Unity's tough when we're messed up as people, isn't it? It's tough when we're so different. It's tough when we look at things differently. It's tough when we have different opinions, when we come from different backgrounds, when we come from different experiences, from different neighborhoods, from different places. So if we're looking for something to unite ourselves around, maybe we could make it this right here, that we all have something in our eyes. We all have something in our eyes. Republicans, you have something in your eyes that's causing you to not see things as clearly as you could. Democrats, you got something in your eye. Libertarians, you too, you got something in your eye. Independents, you too, you got something in your eye. Men, fellas, you got something in your eye. Ladies, respectfully, might have something in your eye. It's little, it's tiny, it's very small. Older people, and I can say that because I'm becoming one very, very quickly. You have something in your eye. Young people, you too. Could we just rally around that? Can we just make that what we're unified around? In fact, that's the gospel. Come to me, you who are weary, burdened, heavy laden, you who don't have it figured out, you who don't have it all together. You come. You people who are perfect, you don't need Jesus. You don't need to come together. We came together because we all have something in our eye. And because we all said, you know what, if we're ever gonna get it figured out, we need Jesus to help us. When we unite ourselves around that right there, that's when the world will know that Jesus is something outside of this world and that his way is better. See, I think Jesus followers should be different. Our entire culture thinks Jesus followers should be different. So let's be different. Let's go about it differently than maybe we've ever done. Let's do our homework first. Let's look inside of us first. Let's look to God to see what he might have in mind. And then let's show up like Jesus with open hands to help heal our world. Let's not do it the same as we've always done. So maybe could we just commit I mean, I know lots of times, Jill and I've been coming to church since I was a kid. Lots of times you're like, can we get this done? Because I can go back to my life the way it was. Okay, let's just, But can we make a commitment today? Can you just decide, I'm not gonna leave here the same. I'm not gonna leave here with the same set of eyes that I had when I came in. I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna begin seeing the world. I'm gonna begin seeing those people. I'm gonna begin seeing those people that won't hurry up and get out of the parking lot. I'm gonna begin seeing everybody with different eyes. Because I might not be seeing it right. And I need Jesus to help me. So what I really wanna do is just leave for us a moment of reflection right now. A moment where we can sit and really decide how it's gonna be. And just reflect on these questions. What's in your eye? Maybe what you do is just say, Jesus, what's in my eye? Would you begin to show me what's causing me to not see things the way that I could see them? And then ask, Jesus, what do you want to do about it? What do you want me to do about it? And then ask, what's my first step gonna be? What am I actually gonna do to start watching the news a little differently, to start talking to my kids a little differently, start showing up at work a little differently with a different set of eyes? Let's take some time really to reflect on these and to make some decisions about what we're gonna look at this week, this month, this year, and how we're gonna show up differently, because the world is just waiting, watching, hoping that somebody shows up different. Let's take time to reflect. So what do you say? Let's do it different this week. In fact, let's do it different all the time. Instead of looking around where we can find blame, let's look to God to see where His power can be displayed. And let's look inside of all of us and see where He can do some work on each of us to change us. This week, let's do it differently. Let's show up differently everywhere we go. Well, we want to be the kind of people that support one another as we do that. If we can be of a support to you, go to canyonridge.org and find all the resources you need to help you begin to live a different kind of life as you follow Jesus. Well, listen, subscribe this link, share this with a friend, and come back and join us next week.